look back at the government and the efforts that the government has made to address the main pressing challenges of the country in the last 1 year. We want to interrogate what the president was saying, and I'm joined in the studio now on KTN Newsline by Marshall Nyangol, who is a financial analyst, and Beatrice Kareda, who's a political and economic affairs commentator. Thank you very much for joining us, and good evening.
Good evening, Eric. Thank you.
So we're going to have a conversation on what the president was saying on several issues. I want to start with the issue of debt. It's a big one in the country. When he was asked about it, he actually said, yes, we are dealing with big debts that were borrowed over the last 10 years and beyond, going beyond the 10 trillion shilling mark, and what that is doing in terms of just putting pressure on the government to repay the debt, to make sure that we don't get into a default situation, but also the pressure it's having on our collections. For every 10 shillings collected in revenue and tax, 7 is going to repaying debt. That means that the government is left with little wiggle room. It must then go back into the market. I want to play a clip of what the president responded to when he was asked the question on debt. Watch this one.
Our economy today is out of debt distress. And that is the truth. For your information, if I didn't step in, let me even say, if I wasn't president, the kind of decisions I have made, very difficult decisions, very painful decisions. Decisions that I know they will cause pain, but it is better we make those decisions now than get Kenya into debt distress. There are almost 8 countries in our continent, including one that went into debt distress. I don't want to mention countries, you know them, last almost 3 weeks or 1 month. That is the worst thing that can happen to any country, to go into debt distress. We are now out of debt distress. Our economy is stable, but the difficult patch is still there. We still have to navigate. All we have done is to avoid the cliff, right? That we have avoided because we have negotiated, we have put brakes on expenditure. We have negotiated a good package with the World Bank, with IMF, with development partners, with bilateral countries, China, Europe, and everywhere. And that's why I have been on the road so many times. People ask, what is he doing? It was necessary for me to step in and stabilize so that Kenya does not go into debt distress.
So the president there says that he can confidently say that Kenya is out of debt distress. But I think first we need to understand what that term means. And I want to start with you, Marshall. What is debt distress? Well,
that will describe a situation where the government is not able to commit to its obligation to pay its debts when, for example, they are due. An example is the Eurobond that is supposed to be paid June next year. So you have a situation where you need a lot of dollars because it's denominated in dollar. So you need to have that maybe in your reserves or some sources so that you pay it. And I think the situation that the president was describing here is that now they're confident they will be able to pay it. Basically, they'll be able to fulfill that obligation. Yes.
But that's just one payment.
Yes, I think...
it's a bullet payment.
If you look at it wholesomely, what the president has been describing, because there are so many payments that are due. So what the president says that he has been traveling across the globe to negotiate debts. Not much information have come out of that in relation to what has been negotiated successfully, what has been rescheduled, and so on and so forth. However, what we know is that recently the World Bank and even IMF committed some funds in the tune of, World Bank alone committed around 2 trillion equivalent Kenya shilling in the next 3 years. That is supposed now to start supporting the government in repaying especially the foreign debts, because you remember these debts have to be repaid, and they are commercial debts. They are issued the Eurobond debt, which have high interest rates. So if you alternate them with the debts from let's say the development partners like World Bank, those ones are expected to come at lower interest rate, or sometimes even zero interest rate. So maybe the region of 2%, 3%. So that one will probably give Kenya some relief in repaying those debts. So it's basically debt restructuring, but those debts are still there. I was looking at the recent figures released by Central Bank. The debt situation, they're talking, as at last week, they're talking of 10.7 trillion in Kenya shilling, of which 5.6 trillion is foreign debt. So the funny thing is that the foreign debt, we haven't had increase in the last 1 year, generally.
Yeah.
It was 4.2 trillion, it's now 5.6 trillion. That change is only because of foreign exchange. They haven't taken more foreign debts in the last 1 year. So you're looking at such situation. The moment the exchange rate affects the debt, the cost of debt because of the exposure in the dollar, I think that's where we're talking of no debt distress.
We'll talk about the dollar and what's happening with that fluctuation shortly, but Beatrice, he says that he had to take some drastic, painful measures so that he can make sure that the country is not in debt distress. Do you see that? Do you see the painful measures? Do you see them as justification for saying that we are out of debt distress? If you look at